Hi, my name is Michael and welcome to From the Attic, a channel dedicated to analysis and essays on your favorite video games. Today we're going to talk about a very special game. In fact, a game so special that it's been remastered more than 2 times over the years following its original release. Of course, I'm talking about Shadow of the Colossus. The absolute classic developed by Team Ico, the same company that brought us the cult hit Ico and the more recent Last Guardian. But for some reason, fans of the company, including myself, always seem to go back to this very unusual adventure that is Shadow of the Colossus. An adventure that mainly consists of a series of cleverly designed boss battles with big open exploration segments in between. Considered as one of the most influential games of our time, even outside of the gaming industry, you might wonder, what's the deal? What makes this game so special, so important? Well, let me tell you why this seemingly simple and straightforward game is the timeless masterpiece it truly is. The original Shadow of the Colossus is released exclusively on the PlayStation 2. It's met with very strong sales and the reviews for it are undeniably positive. Critics praise the game's minimalistic design, its unique aesthetic, its incredible sense of immersion, and its unquestionable emotional power. It's safe to say that people loved this game, but criticize its often very sloppy framerate and clumsy controls. 6 years later, the game is remastered for the PlayStation 3 and re-released alongside Team Ico's first game. Developed by Bluepoint Games, a company that had previously remastered the God of War series, this HD remaster manages to fix most of the issues the original game had while updating some of the game's visuals. Yes, the framerate was in fact much higher, but the controls seemed relatively unchanged. We'll talk about that later. And now here we are in 2018 with another attempt from Bluepoint at remaking Shadow of the Colossus for the PS4, but this time around they redid the entire game from scratch. Even though you can still find the original code somewhere in there, every asset was rebuilt from the ground up, and as you can see, the game never looked that great. But what truly matters though is why? Why make another remake? What makes this game worth revisiting so much? Just a quick disclaimer, this is not a review for Shadow of the Colossus. I think that over the years, pretty much everything has been said about its greatest strengths and weaknesses. This video is really about me trying to figure out the essence of that game and how it achieves some kind of immortal status amongst the gaming community. So with that being said, how does it constantly manages to stay relevant in today's gaming landscape? I think the answer to that question can be found in all of Team Ico's games and show how the core philosophy behind every endeavor of the company manages to prevent their games from ever getting old. The answer is simplicity and focus. I think this philosophy can also be applied to visuals in games. Pixel art, whether you're a fan or not, is a great example of how simplicity, mixed with clever art direction, can still manage to create some incredibly memorable visuals. Visuals that are less likely to get old since they do not share any similarity with our own reality. I believe it's the same thing with game design. The more complex a game is, the more easier it is to become irrelevant at some point. It's also much easier for developers to get lost along the way. Assassin's Creed Origins is the perfect example of losing sight of a game's essence. Look, I really enjoy my time with the game. I mean, I played like 70 hours of it. But still, I think it has a clear identity issue, an issue that didn't exist in the first, more refined entries in the series. Ubisoft doesn't really know what their franchise is anymore. Origins has so many different systems and mechanics that, unfortunately enough, are never quite actually glued together. The RPG mechanics, for instance, are only there thanks to some kind of magical video game logic, since when put in context with the game's lore, they don't make any sense whatsoever. Even though the game isn't focusing on those particular elements, it's hard to pinpoint what it's actually trying to accomplish because of how it's trying to be so many different things at the same time. Being an action-adventure, RPG-oriented, exploration-stealth-based Assassin's Creed game. God damn. Of course, that doesn't mean that bigger games cannot also be more compelling and focused experiences. Red Dead Redemption is a great example of that. This game is about one thing and one thing only, being a Western anti-hero. Every single mechanic, system, or narrative beat in the game is meant to complement that core idea. Whether it's through gunplay, exploration, story, or even minigames or trading, Red Dead never loses sight of its foundation. Obviously, focus is much more easily obtainable through simplicity, and the success of Shadow of the Colossus resides in that fact, in the fact that it can be summed up into an idea. One single sentence that encapsulates the whole experience. Save a loved one by killing 16 colossi. In the game you play as Wonder, a young man who travels to the far-off Forbidden Lands, a vast and mysterious region, hoping to bring back to life a young girl named Mono. To do so, Wonder has to slay 16 beasts, known as Colossi, these tall, ancient, and seemingly forgotten creatures located throughout the land. And that's it. No side quests, no NPCs to interact with, no complex RPG mechanics, nothing. Just straight up boss battles and continuous exploration. Going back to our underlying question, then how can an experience so simplistic by design can achieve such greatness? You see, Shadow of the Colossus, even if driven by this single objective structure, is a very vague and unpredictable game. Yes, the objective is simple and fairly straightforward, but the rest is not. Game director Fumito Ueda always calls to the player's intelligence by urging him to pay close attention to details and to the hidden complexity of the game, especially through gameplay and story. I say hidden complexity because while the game isn't complicated by any means, it's intricate, it has depth. Going back to Assassin's Creed Origins, when I finished every single objective the game had to offer, it was over. I turned off my console and I never played it again. But Shadow of the Colossus, with its technically empty world, always manages to pull me back in since its mysteries are never fully uncovered, and they never will. But how does it actually translate into the game? Let's start with gameplay. The player starts his journey in the Shrine of Worship, this massive temple inhabited by Dorman, a very enigmatic entity that originally launches the player on his crusade against the Colossi. The player then leaves the temple. He brings out his magic sword, his principal means of navigation, and heads towards his next target. He defeats the Colossus and then gets transported back to the temple only to repeat the whole process 16 times. But things aren't so obvious. First, the boss battles are designed like puzzles. Each Colossus has to be approached differently. The player has to figure out his strategy based on the beast's physicality and the environment in which he's located. The player can then jump on the back of the Colossus, try to find its weaknesses, or use the environment to its advantage. Because of their thought-provoking design and their surprising variety, each battle feels drastically different than the previous, making them erratic and keeping them from being repetitive. But first, you need to seek these giants out, leading us to movements and to the navigational mechanics of the game, which are as ambiguous as the fights themselves. As a lot of people mentioned in the past, the controls are very unusual and sometimes even broken to some extent. But in my opinion, the strange control scheme has always added to the unpredictable nature of the game. The fact that Aggro, your horse, doesn't always respond when you call him, or the fact that Wonder can barely stand on his 2 feet when too close to a Colossus, add to an important theme of the game: insignificance. Wonder is so small when compared to these ancestral creatures or to the vast plains of the Forbidden Lands that it's easy to feel oppressed by the game's world. The controls makes it absolutely impossible to master the game, making every single action the player initiates, even climbing the most ordinary looking ruin, a challenge on its own. You can in fact raise your sword in a sunlit area in order to find the approximate direction of the next encounter, or you can even bring out the world map. But none of these tools make the task easy, since both of them are far from being as precise as the tools you may find in games like Fable, for example. They do provide the player a general sense of where it must go next, but it still has to explore, adding to the incredible feeling of adventure. But you might ask, what's the point of exploring the world if there's nothing to do in it? Basically, you take it all in. You see, in Team Ico's games, plot and backstory are always implied instead of force-fed through cutscenes or dialogues. There is a very strong emphasis on world building through environmental storytelling, and because of that, the actual journey to a Colossus is of utmost relevance, much like the very unconventional storytelling of Bloodborne. The open world isn't there to add value or length to the game, it's there as a narrative device. You stumble upon lakes, caves, canyons, forests, deserts, and ruins, and build, unconsciously or not, the game's backstory. You're not exploring the world for what it has in it, but for what it is. There's no need for notes or diary entries to understand that you are standing in a very, very ancient place full of history. You need to connect the dots by yourself in order to make sense of what's happening and why. It's very clear now that Team Ico is absolutely obsessed with the idea of leaving unresolved questions to the player, questions that manifest themselves through every element of the game. Their games have always been about that. Whether it's through story, lore, or even core gameplay mechanics, Shadow of the Colossus likes to keep things beautifully vague. I apologize in advance for the cheesy metaphor, but to me, Team Ico's games are like incomplete puzzles. They give you very moderately pieces to this puzzle via story, mechanics, etc. Then you assemble, you try to piece things together. But there's always that empty space, a space that will deliberately always remain empty. The game is never completely mastered, never complete. The beauty of that game exists in that particular space, in the questions it leaves unanswered. Who is Wonder? Who is Dorman? Why were the Forbidden Lands forbidden in the first place? Where do these strange half-living, half-automaton beings come from? Why was Mono cursed? Why doesn't Agro always respond to orders? What is the purpose of that hidden garden at the top of the shrine? We don't know, and that's exactly why Shadow of the Colossus is timeless, because of the mysteries that inherently exist within these empty spaces. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe for more, and feel free to leave any comment on what you liked or disliked about the video. I'm here to learn, and I'm currently working on an analysis of the marketing behind Death Stranding. It should be out in a week or two. So that being said, I'll see you guys next time.